Oh, I'm going to have to get out of there. Full moment here. All right, here we go. All right, so can you see my slides? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so once again, I'm Suzanne Lavigne. I'm the Director of Community Services for Franklin County. I'm a Bridges Out of Poverty trainer. I was trained in 2018, and so I've done several of these trainings. And we can do Bridges training in a number of different ways. We can do 1 or 2 hour overviews, 3 hour overviews, 6 hour, 12 hour, 18 hours. So it just depends on how in-depth people want to go in terms of their training. So Bridges Out of Poverty, we are in our 5th edition of this book. And if some of you recall, it first began with a framework for understanding out of poverty, and that was written by Ruby Payne. She wrote the book in 1996, and it really is a collection of experiences that she had when she married her husband, who was in situational poverty, and we'll go over all that terminology in a few minutes. And then as an educator, she was both a teacher and a principal and an administrator for a school district, where she began to really recognize that there were differences between the economic classes. The next book, Bridges Out of Poverty, that was written in 1999 by Phil Duvall and Terry Denucci Smith. They collaborated with Ruby Payne. And what really connected me to Bridges' work is that this comes out of Phil and Terry's work in a substance use disorder treatment outpatient clinic. And they were able to go a little deeper with the framework and came out of that with Bridges Out of Poverty. And so Bridges Out of Poverty really helps to frame the stability of economic class. And, you know, when we think about economic class, we think of poverty, middle, and wealth, middle class and wealth. And so we'll take a little bit of a deep dive into each one of those. And I'm just going to do the top of the trees today because it is an overview. After Bridges Out of Poverty, there were several books written, Getting Ahead. This is a particular model for individuals living in generational poverty. And Getting Ahead provides them with resources, tools, and new skills to create a better, greater future story. And we use that terminology, future story, because everyone needs a future that is framed in achievement, advancement, growth, reaching one's potential. And so that's a really neat model that the Bridges family of models provides. Then there are these 2 other books, Sustainable Communities and Bridges Across Every Divide. And those are really written for folks who really want to deep dive into policy and research, really want to look at communities and how Bridges Out of Poverty communities can be created. And right now, Bridges falls under the organization of AHA process. And if you think about AHA, it's really thinking about a light bulb going off. And these concepts that we share in the model really allow people to really open their eyes and really see things in a different way. There are 220 Bridges communities in the United States and Canada. And Bridges communities include individuals who are from poverty, from middle class and wealth, as well as legislative people, policy drivers, community advocates. And so it really is a way to reframe the experience of living in a particular community. So one of the things that we talk about in Bridges is social cognitive theory. And what this really comes down to is relationships and knowledge, resources, and demands of the environment. And so we think about resources, and we're going to talk about 11 resources that we need to have available to us to make changes in our life. We need to have relationships, and really we need to have people who are supportive and can help us grow. And then we have to recognize the demands of the environment. And so some of our environments, particularly if we're living in poverty, we do not have access to all the resources, if you will, in comparison to somebody from wealth. There's a huge difference in the number of resources that someone might have. So there are 13 key points in Bridges. And I'm just going to go over a couple of these because they really lay the groundwork for our conversation today. There is a difference between generational and situational poverty. Generational poverty is an experience of having lived in a family that has 2 or more generations who have lived in poverty. So there's a history of poverty in a family. Situational poverty is something that might occur if someone loses a job, divorce. It might be the death of the main income producer of a family or a partnership. And so big differences there. We really zero in on generational poverty. Then we can look at middle class. Middle class is right there in the middle of the road, if you will, has more resources than somebody living in generational poverty. New money has to do with somebody who may have just, I don't know, won the lottery maybe, somebody who's published a patent and is receiving a lot of royalties because of that patent. And then we have old money. Old money has been a historic tradition in a family. So we think about the Kennedys, we think about the Vanderbilts, we think about the Roosevelts. I mean, all of these, the Post family, that is old money because it is history of money. So that's one of the key points. So, as I said, there's 13 key points that we would really drill down in a training, a full day training. So we also have to look at the Bridges lens. So in the previous Bridges Out of Poverty edition, there was something that we referred to as the triple lens. And the triple lens has to do with individual, institutional, and community. Individual, we're working about improving relationships, establishing relationships, having the education and the training of the Bridges model. Institutions then begin to improve the outcomes of what their organization provides using the Bridges model. And then a Bridges community is really looking at improving cooperation. The fourth lens was just added, and it seeks to look at policy and how we improve systems. And so we have to look at Bridges through these 4 lenses in terms of economic class stability. So the first thing that we do in a Bridges training would be to ask you how you define your Bridges lens. So it may come down to that you are a direct provider of service. You sit across from somebody on a daily basis. They are accessing the service of your organization. You might be a clinician, a case manager, so you're working directly with that person. Institution might have to do with, being a supervisor, a manager, a department head, an associate director, a CEO, because you are looking at how your institution or your organization can do better in supporting people in poverty. Community, once again, you might be involved in a group that is really working to improve the community and its stability. And you might be all about policy. You might be a researcher. You might be an educator. So there's a number of different ways that you can come into the Bridges model. So probably, most of you here are either here because you want to do better with individuals living in poverty, or you might be an administrator who wants your agency to improve those outcomes. One of the other things that we talk about in Bridges has to do with resources, and we define poverty as to the extent to which an individual does without resources. So, the less access to resources that you have, the more likely you're going to work from a tyranny of the moment approach, meaning that if you have very limited resources in front of you, could somebody mute their mic, please? If you have limited resources in front of you and every day is a struggle, your focus is about survival. That's all it is. And so everything else in the world can be going on around you, but you are so dead focused on that one particular issue. Is it how you're going to pay the rent? Is it how are you going to get to DSS when you don't have a vehicle and you live 2 hours out of town? How are you going to put food on the table for your children? It's all of right there in the moment. Poverty is very stressful. And so you can imagine, the use of that term, tyranny of the moment and the stress of poverty. So we talk about these resources. They range from financial, emotional, mental, language, social capital, health. Financial resources is the smallest piece of this bigger picture of resources. We talk about the ability to, not react from an emotional, not use an emotional reaction, but being able to step back and really think and use some foresight in how you're going to respond. Mental is about education. It's about being able to read, to write, to use a computer, to be able to speak and interact and really negotiate for yourself. Social capital, we talk about bonding, we talk about bridging capital. Bonding has to do with relationships. It might be a friend, a neighbor, it might be a family member, where bridging capital really has to do with people that can help you get to the next move. So for example, you have bridging capital if you are able to go to DSS, meet with your case manager, participate in a program that might increase your skills. That case manager is an example of bridging capital. Health, of course, is really significant. If we don't have health, then certainly we're going to have struggles. Spiritual, being able to see something larger and beyond yourself. And then we have hidden rules, which are down at the bottom. And these are unspoken cues and habits. Integrity and trust, motivation and persistence, and relationships all come from the getting ahead model. So, we have all of these resources and we talk a little bit more about them. So one of the great things the Bridges model does is give you ways of thinking about things so that they're very easy to remember, that you can use with an individual that you're working with. And so the hand model for resources, or that mental model of resources, is this. And so we think about the thumb. So the thumb, it does a lot of work for our hand. It helps us be able to grasp things. And so it is the representation of the physical health that we have. Spiritual, we use the index finger because that points the way for us. Emotional, that's the finger that we use if we become emotional. Mental, although very important to us, it's actually the weakest digit on the hand. And financial is the pinky. And as I had said earlier, it is just a small piece of all of the resources provided. We think about bridging and bonding capital, because when we reach out and introduce ourselves to people, we shake our hand. And that connection in the palm of our hand represents our bridging and bonding capital. The hidden rules that we're going to talk about are the wrist. And those hidden rules, are so important because, it's right there that guides the movement of the hand. And there's a little note here about 2 sets. So we need to know the hidden rules of our own economic class, and we have to know the rules of the next class. So if we're living in poverty, we know the hidden rules of poverty, and we also know the rules of middle class, because we've got to interact with middle class. And so we need to know those rules because it helps us understand the expectations that the middle class has. And then, of course, we have these 3 other resources that we've added from Getting Ahead. So we think about, we provide a summary or a wrap up after every section of bridges. So, we've talked about generational poverty is just not about money. It's about access to resources. That's stability. We talk about, suggestions that we may have in terms of what we can do in institutions or what we can do in working with individuals to help them become more stable in their life. We talk about research, and there are 4 areas of research: individual behaviors and circumstances, community conditions, exploitation, and political economic structures. So there's a lot of material in this particular section. So as you know, when we talk about, or not as you know, but when we talk about research, we know that research can be presented in a way that really meets the expectation or the intent of the researcher. So we really have to be careful of how we look at research and how we interpret what's presented to us. So we drill down on some of these 4 core areas. And we also talk about history. So, there are so many examples in history in terms of how people have been denied access to housing, to education, to employment, social bridging capital, language, voting. So, one of the things that you might think about in terms of housing, many times over the years, individuals from BIPOC communities were denied access to mortgages. They were denied access to insurance. We have examples of the Disabilities Education Act, where schools were not educating individuals living with a disability. There's such things as redlining. Redlining has to do with, a denial of services such as mortgages or those insurance programs where, people of a particular ethnic or race were denied those types of supports. They weren't allowed to have a mortgage in a particular area because predominantly poverty, low income, they couldn't guaranteed income to support a mortgage, so they were denied. We think about education. We think about, Rosa Parks and her experience on the school bus. We talk about Jim Crow's laws, that legalized racial segregation. You think about in terms of education, the American Indian boarding schools, which removed indigenous children from their homes to, live at a residential school where they could not use their given name, they could not use their language. They needed to learn white customs and white ways. And so, all of these things that, we look at under research has to do with history. So then if you think about, how access to all of these things have been granted, well, of course, if we think about middle class and we talk about wealth, parents are able to provide for academic education. They're able to, get private lessons, piano lessons. They have access to really good health care. They may, be named in a grandparent's trust for them. They may even have parents who can fund a down payment for a home. There's a historical transfer of education and information in terms of, how to manage your taxes and, access medical care, how you, work with legal issues. There may be private education and you might have a club membership. So the more economically stable you are in middle class and health and wealth, you're able to access all of these things. Where if you are living in generational poverty, you might most likely will experience some form of discrimination. So those are really key points under research. So, we talk about the causes of poverty. We talk about exploitation and political structures that contribute to the cause of poverty. We recognize that income can change on a dime, but wealth is created over time. We have a lot of problem solving, thinking tool suggestions that we cover in this particular section. And, we can all have blind spots. Also in this section, we talk about the ALICE report, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So if we were doing this for Essex County, we would be looking specifically at the ALICE report for Essex County. And then we would also be looking at the New York State Poverty Report, which drills down to every county. JCEO provides that, really looks at the poverty rate in a specific county and breaks it all down in terms of employment and education, the number of children living in poverty. So we really dig into that specific to the county. So we also talk about mental models. And so one of the things that, and this is the section that we would spend the most time on, because mental models are really formed in the way that we are raised, the way that our family and caregiver interprets them for us when we're young, and we are indoctrinated indoctrinated into those beliefs or those customs or traditions, or however you might want to think about. But at some point along the way, we may have to challenge those belief systems that we were educated in and really examine how that affects us as an adult and how we probably need to change some of those. Oftentimes our mental model kind of, is an automatic kind of a thing. It's an initial response, it's an attitude, it's a bias. And, if we're not careful, we certainly might have some difficulty within our community and our social network. We really think about our mental models really because of that attitude and that bias and the belief. It shapes the way that we behave. It shapes the way we feel. So it's very cognitive behavioral in its approach. And it really can interfere with learning, because if we're immersed in an inaccurate mental model, then likely we're going to have some struggles. So what I'm asking you to do, and what I ask participants to do, is just set that all aside. Anything that you were raised with, anything that you believe in, try and set that aside and think about these new mental models that we are going to create for economic class. So what, if you have a piece of paper in front of you, you could draw this large circle in the middle of your paper. And this circle is going to represent the things that somebody living in generational poverty might have to manage, might have to accomplish. They, this is how they spend their day. It's a representation of the activities of the day. And then above that, if you could put 3 or 4 oval shapes above that circle, and you could jot down institutions. Those ovals represent institutions or organizations that somebody from generational poverty would need to access or interact with. And then underneath your circle, put 4 or 5 bullets. And those bullets represent businesses. They're businesses that somebody in generational poverty would, go to, might purchase items from. What are they concerned about in terms of, is it food? Well, where do they find food? What kind of businesses might they interact with or visit during a day? So we have this, this diagram, a large circle in the middle of the page that reflects the activities that any individual in any one of the economic classes would spend their day. So, for example, in poverty, how might somebody spend their day? It might be getting to all their agencies that they have to report to. Getting laundry done is a huge task and sometimes takes a whole day, because you've got to find a ride. You've got to have, if you don't have a ride, you've got to find a way to, get to the laundromat. But if you are considering doing laundry in middle class, you just go to your washer and dryer that's somewhere in your house. So it's like, you could throw in a couple of loads of laundry at the end of the workday and be done. And if you're living in wealth, are you going to worry about doing your laundry? No, because somebody else does. So those are the things that you might do in an average day. Those institutions for somebody in generational poverty, one of them might include the school. So why would a person from generational poverty visit the school? Maybe the teacher, the principal, has called them to the school because there's trouble in the classroom with one of their children. School might, for middle class, might visit a school for a play, a sports event. You might be a member of the PTA. And in wealth, do you visit a school or a college? Or, are you giving the reason that you're there at the college is because you're being recognized for a sizable donation? Businesses down at the bottom, somebody in generational poverty might visit a pawn shop, a payday lender, a rent to own. Somebody in middle class might take their pet to the vet. They may go to a health club, an exercise club. Somebody in wealth, where might they go? They may not go anywhere because somebody's doing it for them. They're bringing that service to them. So the attorney comes to their home. The hairdresser comes to the home. They might visit a very posh and elite spa. So the mental model is all the same. We all have institutions that we interact with. We all have activities of our day, and we have businesses that we access during that day or that week. That is the mental model. So in terms of the mental model of generational poverty, we talk about the tyranny of the moment. And the tyranny of the moment is basically the need to act overwhelms any willingness people have to learn. The need to act overwhelms any willingness people have to learn. So if you are caught up in that stress of the moment where you don't know how you are going to get yourself to the probation officer for your weekly check-in, then everything else is, off to the side, and that is your primary focus. You might be thinking about how are you going to stay in your home or your apartment if you don't have the means to pay the rent. And that is where you are really immersed. That is your focus. And because of that, significant level of stress, it's about reacting. The converse to that, the healthier you are psychologically, or the less you may seem to need to change, the more you can change. So the more stable you are, the healthier you are, the more resources that you have, the more that you recognize you can change. So just to wrap up, that mental model of generational poverty, institutions, the activities of the day, and the businesses that are visited is really a way to describe. It's an abstract representation of the mental model. It really reflects the experience of somebody living in poverty. Poverty is relative. We understand poverty by our experience. So if we are living in poverty, we know it very well. If you are living in a third world country, poverty is relative because everybody in that community is living in poverty. So if you're not familiar with it, it may be a real distant understanding or a misconception of what poverty is all about. And poverty really provides, that there's no future story, there's no choice and no power because we're acting from that tyranny of the moment. So in terms of mental models, we look at the mindsets, blind spots, and hidden rules. We talk about meeting basic needs, and we talked about the tyranny of the model. When you get close to survival, you have less time to really think and plan. There is no problem solving because it is reaction. And, relationships, you've got to have relationships while living in generational poverty because they truly are your most important resource. So we'll talk a little bit about hidden rules. So every economic class has a set of hidden rules. They reflect the way that that class or that family or that group interact with one another. It's, you know, certainly unspoken cues. You know, people don't learn their hidden rules, you know, in the classroom. It's just taught to them. They observe it, they learn it. And so it's really important to recognize that hidden rules, if you don't know your hidden rules of your group and you don't know the hidden rules of the next class up, then you're really going to struggle in interacting in the community and, you know, in life in general. So one of the key points that we talk about under hidden rules is that most schools and businesses operate from middle class norms and values. So you think about a school, an institution. We want to educate. We want people to, you know, achieve success. And once you graduate from high school, more than likely, you're going to be encouraged to go to college. And that may not be the truth for everyone. We bring our own hidden rules with us everywhere we go. And so, you know, sometimes if we are, say we are living in generational poverty and we have a set of these hidden rules, when we interact with somebody from middle class, we don't understand what they're talking about, and they may not understand what we're talking about or why we're so focused on a particular situation. So in the training, the 6-hour training, we actually take a quiz. Could you survive in poverty, middle class, and wealth? And it is really telling once a person gets through those 3 little quizzes, the more checks you have, the more likely you have a familiarity around that economic class. So one of the hidden rules we talk about refers to driving forces. This is what really that economic class has a focus on. So we've talked about this. Survival is the driving force of poverty. Work in middle class, political connections in wealth. Relationships are so key and is a driving force in poverty. Achievement, financial connections, entertainment, material security, and social connections. Entertainment is a very important piece of generational poverty because generational poverty is extremely stressful. And it really wears on a person because survival is always the first thing that they think about and the last thing at night they think about. So entertainment, being able to have a TV, a laptop, a cell phone, all of these things provide entertainment and takes away that stressor for just a, you know, brief moment of time. They are able to really disconnect from the urgency of their situation and just, you know, take a breather. There are hidden rules around time. And so you can see the differences here between poverty, middle class, and wealth. Right now in the moment is the most important for poverty. The future is most important in middle class because we're always looking for achievement. And in wealth, it's all about tradition and history. In poverty, decisions are made in the moment based on an immediate feeling or sense of survival. In middle class, decisions are made against future ramifications. So it may be that family trying to save up for their first home. And, you know, they are invited to go to a week's vacation with another family. and they have to make a decision, and they have to weigh the impact of buying the house or going on vacation. And so those are decisions that are made based on some of the future goals that they have. And decisions in wealth are made on tradition. They are made in terms of how their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents made decisions. How they invest their wealth. I mean, all of those things in terms of time and history is so key in the economic class of wealth. So basically, hidden rules, talk about the learning environment and how we're taught those hidden rules. It makes us aware of why, and because we are making those decisions based on our hidden rules. We look at the quiz of poverty, middle class, and wealth. And we also spend quite a bit of time talking about how important it is to honor and respect the hidden rules of each economic class, because that is, what our life is. I mean, that's how somebody in poverty, someone in middle class, and wealth are grow up and learn and just adopt those rules of their economic class. So we have to be mindful of it. We talk about registers of language. And one of the things we do is break down each one of these registers. We have some exercises that we use so that people can understand what these registers are and how they differ. We think about frozen register, and that's something like, wedding vows. Formal, that is the language that we use when we are writing policy. Consultative is that, reciprocity in terms of conversation with one another. Casual is how we talk when we're amongst our friends and families. And of course, there's an intimate layer of our register, which, has to do with lovers and twins. And, if you have taken all your required courses in sexual harassment, you will certainly experience that is a form of misusing of a register, the intimate register. So typically when we tell a story in formal register, we have a beginning and an end of a story. Casual is a roundabout. There's lots of interjections from the people that are listening from the story. So think about a fairy tale over here, a parent reading a fairy tale to their child. And this is a story being told about an experience someone has had in the community. And, there are patterns of discourse. When the casual strays away from that formal register, then there's lots of different, it's not the beginning. It might start with the end. A casual story might start with the beginning or the end. So there's no consistency in how that story is told. And as I said, we have several group exercises that we use for better understanding the register languages. Another planning backward is a tool that we use, another resource for people. And basically looking at, well, this is the end result. This is what I want to accomplish. And then we step back from that accomplishment, and what would be the next thing? What would be the next thing? The next thing? How do we start this whole process? And so planning backward is a tool that we use. So we have a summary here of language and story structure. We also talk about voices. We talk about the child voice, the parent voice, and the adult voice. We talk a little bit about mediation and how that helps people really negotiate for their needs. So we do quite a bit of work around that. And there's just a piece of information there that casual register is 80% reliant on nonverbal. So that's pretty thought-provoking. We talk about families and support systems. So, we talk about the family and the larger support systems that we might have, and, the agencies or the organizations and the institutions that support the family. We also recognize that families and support systems are the ways by which people are nurtured, protected, and developed. We talk about family structure. That's the configuration of relationships. And we talk about family function, which is how well a child is provided for and cared for and nurtured. Under family structure, if you think about a family living in middle class, you might think about two parents or two caregivers and the children. Maybe you might have a grandparent in there or someone from an extended family. But we do a lot of digging into the family structure of generational poverty, because there may be many people under this family structure. So there may be a mother, there may be, a boyfriend. The boyfriend may have one of his children staying with that group. And so it's not reflective of middle class values in terms of how we care and support one another. Family stability is influenced by individual risk and protective factors, systems and policies. And, throughout the course of the training, every one of these areas is addressed. We talk about bonding and bridging capital, and I think I talked a little bit about that in terms of bonding social capital, our friends, our families, those that we are connected to, and bridging social capital would be the ones that are helping us get a leg up, helping us access more supports. It might be that case manager at DSS. We often take a look at this particular quote: no significant learning occurs outside of significant relationships. Think about the role models that you had growing up. Think about the mentors that you've had in your professional lives. And we learn a lot because of a significant relationship. A coach, a teacher, role models, mentors. We spend some time in terms of talking about creating relationships and how deposits and withdrawals are made to those relationships. And I think about, my work over the years. I've always been able to remember a therapeutic alliance basically is built on safety, rapport, respect, and trust. And if you have that therapeutic alliance, you're able to really help and support and guide the people that you're working with. And so you can see that we can quickly make positive deposits on the left-hand side, or we can certainly make negative withdrawals on the right. And here's a mental model of social capital. Our bonding capital are here in the middle, in the very center. Those are our relationships, really important relationships. And our bridging capital on the outside, school, organizations, churches, neighbors and friends, clubs, and work. And so you'll see that a lot of the bonding capital is over on this side, where we might have a bridging capital, maybe a boss, a coworker that's helping us to get ahead. We introduce transactional relationships. Basically, you are in a relationship for, to gain something and give something. So, in poverty, transactional relationships really are determined by the length of a survival issue. So if you're homeless and you have no place to stay, then you're likely going to try and reach out to one of your bonding capital folks to be able to crash on their couch. In middle class or wealth, we're usually paying for a service. And so you think about your mechanic, your car needs to have an oil change or the brakes replaced. You are paying that mechanic for a service. It's very brief, time limited. You get the service and then you're gone. So in order for relationships to grow into one of mutual respect, we have to have the same size circles. We talk about that adult voice between adult voice. The worst thing that we can do is to use a parent voice scolding at an individual in poverty, because they're going to respond childlike. They're going to use their child voice when they come back, when a parent voice, is used to kind of take their inventory. It's not about this big circle talking at a little circle. So kind of relates back to the therapeutic alliance of safety, rapport, respect, and trust. So there are bridges constructs that wrap up all of the information that we share in the model. And so we've talked about economic class. We've got to use economic class to really understand the experience of others. And so we use those mental models. We recognize that there are a number of ways or things that cause poverty. And so we may talk about race and gender and other inequalities that really prevent an access to resources. We talk about poverty being defined as the extent to which one goes without resources. We have to build relationships of mutual respect. We have to create plans that utilize all four bridges lenses. So we've got to have, those in individual, institutional, community, and policy placeholders at the table. We've got to have accurate mental models of poverty, middle class, and wealth. We need to stabilize the environment at all four levels of the bridges lens to remove barriers. We have to talk about all those four areas of poverty, the causes of poverty, individual, institutional, exploitation, all of those types of areas. We have to look at long-term support across all four of those areas in order to develop a bridges community. And, we've got to be able to develop an economically and sustainable community that everyone can live well. So there you have it. So that's about an hour overview of the key themes under the bridges model. Happy to answer any questions, happy to talk about providing the full training. However you might want to use the rest of the time, Stephanie, is up to you.